Hey everybody, how's everybody doing today? Welcome to my Thursday live stream where we talk about photography and I try to answer any questions I can. But today's a special day because I have a guest with me, Marco Chiapetta from Hot Hardware. He has a YouTube channel here called Hot Hardware and also has a website, Hot Hardware, where he specializes in doing review of computer gear, hardware, software, mostly hardware, systems, you know, all the latest things coming out. And I get a lot of questions on my stream about, you know, what's the best computer or hardware upgrade that I can use or do to get better for my photo editing or video editing. Because there's a lot of choices out there in the consumer market. And it can be a little confusing for people that aren't really into that kind of thing, right? You know, how much memory do you need? What kind of hard drive is best? Or how much hard drive space? Doesn't make any difference. Maybe a different kind of monitor or upgrading the CPU. There's all kinds of choices. Maybe get the latest Apple M1. You know, there's AMD Threadrippers. So today's stream will be maybe a little bit technical, but I'll try and simplify it, or we will try and simplify it as much as we can and break it down to just the core things that you need to look for. But like I said, Marco's really the specialist in this, and I thought it'd be a good idea to have his feedback about what kinds of things you can do to improve your experience at home when you're doing your post-processing and editing for photos and videos. And Marco's been a long time viewer of mine, actually, because he's an avid Olympus shooter as well. So we're going to talk a little bit about that in the beginning. But without further ado, let me just bring Marco on, and we'll get started.
Hello, everybody. How's it going, Rob?
Good, good. So I just gave a brief intro. I'm not sure if you could hear that, but basically, tell us a little bit about yourself, Marco, you know, and about yourself and what your channel and your website's all about, and then where we're going to go from here.
Sure. So I'm a longtime tech geek. I fell in love with computers way back in the days of the Commodore 64 when I was just a little kid, and kind of fell into my career at Hot Hardware. My partner and the editor-in-chief started this site, I think it was back in 98 or early 99. And I was writing for a website called voodoo3.net covering a particular video card that was out at the time. And Dave needed help on Hot Hardware, so I started helping out in the news for free. And we both were so passionate about PCs and tech, we just kind of turned that hobby into a business. And Hot Hardware has been online for close to 22 years now. We're one of the last independent tech publishers. You know, we're independent from any large publishers in the US. We're connected with all of the large OEMs, Intel, NVIDIA, AMD, Samsung, basically you name it. We cover the products on the site when we can. You know, we're independent and there's only so much we can cover, but there's tons of content on the site. And over the years, we've expanded to YouTube as well. We're trying to build the channel now, you know, trying to focus more on video, particularly this year. But we've had videos online for many years. You know, I have an Alienware notebook review with 1 million views on it. So yeah, just a passion that turned into my career. And over the years, I've written for basically all of the computer magazines that used to exist. And I'm also a contributor at Forbes as well.
Yeah, so you have a lot of experience. You've been doing this forever. Tell me a little bit about actually And before I go on, I do have links below to his YouTube channel, his website, and also his column on Forbes that he contributes to. But tell me a little bit about, why did you start watching my channel and about your experience with Olympus in particular?
Sure, it's funny. So I couldn't tell you how I got started with Olympus. I've always had Olympus cameras way back to point and shoots. All of our articles on Hot Hardware, we produce everything from the images to the layout. Lots of times we're working autonomously. We're a one-man show putting these articles together, and one of our colleagues will proofread for us, but we're doing everything start to finish. So all of my product photography was done on Olympus cameras, and I just kind of progressed over the years. And in 2019, I grabbed EM1 Mark II, and I just loved that camera. It made me want to go take photos. And I just started exploring all the different Olympus channels, fell in love with you and Robin Wong and Jimmy, and I watch all of you guys. And
Mhm.
got a severe case of gas, and now I basically have the whole OMD lineup. Between my wife's got an EM10 Mark IV, I'm streaming right now on an EM1X. My daily driver is the EM1 III, and I worked a deal recently for an EM5 III. So I basically have the whole lineup sitting here. I'm very, very spoiled.
Yeah, that's quite a setup you got. And yeah, I'm streaming on the EM1 Mark II myself. So, we're both really big, avid Olympus users. And I think I remember you mentioned something about you started with a C8080, right?
So now I have a funny story with the C8080. I had a 4040, and then I think a stylus before that, one of the small
Uh-huh.
ones. But the C8080 is special to me because I used it to propose to my wife. I got the camera, and I said, "Oh, let's go to." There's a park that in the town she grew up in that she liked to go to. So I had taken pictures of the engagement ring, and I said, "Let's go test out the new camera in this park." And we were taking pictures, walking around, and we sat down to review the pictures. And as she was scrolling, she came upon the ring, and I got down on one knee and I proposed.
Wow. Wow. That's a great story. I was when I first heard it actually, I thought you actually just showed her a ring on your camera and that was your proposal,
Now,
but you actually had the ring there physically, right?
yeah, I'm not that cheap.
Okay. I'm having a little glitch on my end here technically. I'm gonna have to I have to refresh because I lost my browser. It froze up on
Okay,
me. Hold on.
sure.
Hopefully the viewers can still see and hear us. Uh, I'm gonna wait. I'm sorry. If any can somebody in the chat section let me know they can see and hear me? Um,
Looks like we're still live, Rob. I have the stream up and it's still working, I think.
yeah, I just can't do anything on my end in terms of
Uh-oh.
uh, swapping screens and things. Let me. If we lose this connection, Marco and viewers, I'm going to send Marco a new link, and you guys have to go back to my channel and find the stream where it's going to continue in case this stream dies on me. Dang it! I don't think it's stream Melanapp's fault this time. It's my browser just froze up.
Oop, there goes Rob. But it looks like we're still live.
I'm sorry, guys. Uh, how about now? You guys can see me, right? But you can't see Marco? If somebody could type in the chat section for me, I'm sorry. Okay. Marco, can you disconnect and try and reconnect using the same link I gave you? Yeah, I should be able to get Marco back on. He just has to reconnect like I did. All right, awesome. Okay. Phew. Killed
You
the
saved it,
screen. All
Rob.
I had to do was refresh. But okay, so let's start out with basically I think a lot of viewers will be interested in, some of the questions I get are, what are some of the kind of upgrades and computers and things we need to look out for if we're either thinking about upgrading or buying a new computer. But before we get that far, what kind of buyers do you think there are generally for photography? We're mostly photographers and some videography, but what kind of buyers do you see? Uh, where would they start, for example? If you're a photographer and you have a computer that's, say, 5 or 6 years old, right?
Right.
Where would you start? Would you think about upgrading or just buying all new?
Typically, you end up having to go all new. Lots of people, especially with desktops, not so much so with notebooks or small form factor systems, they buy a machine with the idea that they may upgrade over time, and they never do it. And by the time you decide to upgrade, you need a new motherboard anyway, or you need a new power supply. You want a new graphics card, and that's going to cost more than your whole rig anyway. So it typically makes sense to just do another whole rig in terms of a desktop. And you don't really often have a choice in a notebook. Sometimes you can swap a drive or the memory, but even then, most people don't want to pull open, a premium machine like this machine. Here's a really nice Lenovo machine, 9 millimeters thick. You don't want to be ripping this thing apart to swap hardware inside it, So
Right.
often, if you're 4 or 5 years old, I would typically recommend getting a new machine because the experience with the latest storage and current gen processors and the latest graphics cards and the newest software, it really does make a difference.
Okay. And what do you think was the most significant improvement, say, in the last 5 years on computers?
Definitely solid state storage. If you have a fairly modern system, assuming you have a decent processor, but you're still on a hard drive, switching to an SSD completely changes the experience from systems booting in just a couple seconds to apps just popping open when you click them. A good
Right.
SSD can make all the difference in the world.
Right. So if we were to sort of break out like, say, just your casual weekend warrior for photography, they're editing just that day's photo walk of photos, and that's really all they do on their computer. How are they? What is if the computer is like 5 or 6 years old? Do you think they're still good, or should they upgrade to make a big improvement in their experience there, or what do you think?
I mean, it's a tough call. So when people, I used to sell systems too, and years ago I was actually the top Amiga salesman in the U.S. for the company I was
Amiga.
working at. But I love the Commodore stuff. But there's two type of buyers. There's people that buy the bare minimum because they don't think they need the horsepower, and then there's people that buy the best they can at that moment, right? And that's typically what I'd recommend people do is figure out your budget and you just spend all of it because it just extends the usable life of the system. You're less likely to need an upgrade in the short term. So 4 to 5 years, there's been really big advancements. A few years ago, AMD launched their Ryzen processors after years of kind of trailing Intel, and it really pushed both companies forward. AMD has not taken their foot off the gas. And although Intel has some issues that they're contending with internally with manufacturing, they still make fantastic fast processors. And the advancements over the last few years, especially since I guess it was 2017 or 2018 when the first Ryzen came. Since then, big improvements in processor speed, big improvements in core counts. You also have faster I/O, so the drives can be faster memory. And when you put all that together with Windows 10, which Microsoft gets a bad rap, but in my opinion, Windows 10 is really a great OS, and it's much snappier than some of the previous gen stuff. You
Hmm.
put all that together and you end up with just a much better overall, smoother experience that helps everything, not just the photo and video editing process, but everything from booting up to just launching apps feels better and faster and saves you time in the long run.
Okay. And just a sort of a general budget range in terms of pricing, what for the weekend warrior type, if they wanted to buy a new system, uh, how much do you think would be a good budget to get something decent just to carry
Something
them?
decent. If you're looking for a notebook, you can really find nice stuff in the $800 and up, maybe $899 and up. On the
Hmm.
desktop side, you can save quite a bit of money. I would still recommend spending about 800. You know, a Ryzen 5 or higher end Core i5 class
Hmm.
machine is, especially today, is
Okay.
faster than a Core i7 from a few years ago. And you want to shop at least, in my opinion, at least bare minimum 16 gigs of RAM. 16 gigs of RAM is only $90 to $100 nowadays.
Yeah.
And however, the largest SSD that you think you'll need, you can never have too much storage. It's not a detriment
Right.
having a big drive.
Right. And if we were to kind of step up, we're looking at the same user who 5, 6 years ago was just a casual weekend warrior, but now is an enthusiast like myself. Um, what kind of upgrades, or what kind of system would you recommend to them, and what's the general price range?
So the general price range is huge because the market's insane right now.
Hmm.
There's a supply shortage especially on the GPU side, and prices are just nuts. Forgetting that for a moment and sort of just considering MSRPs, you can build a really powerful, super fast, minimal compromise system in the 1500 to 2000 range if you're talking
Hmm.
desktop. And it's kind of the same with notebooks. They're really beautiful premium machines with lots of memory and fast storage and a discrete GPU, typically going to be 1899 and up, in that range. You can find
Hmm.
cheaper, but they might not use the most premium materials in the build. Um,
Right.
but my general advice is always just spend the most you can at that moment when you're upgrading. I know it's easy to say, and it's, not
Right.
everybody's got the funds to just throw around like that, but it really does, extend the life of the system and help the overall speed performance across a wide variety of apps.
Okay. There's a comment here from one of your colleagues that says, if
Uh-oh.
you can switch Marco's mic input to the AT2020, sound like the webcam mic is picking up instead.
Let me check my mic. My mic is set properly, so I don't know if it's on my end. Might just
Yeah.
be the audio.
Yeah, I'm hearing a
Let me
tiny bit of
bring
static, but
let me bring my mic a little closer, see if we can make it a little better here. How's that? Volume any better?
sounds the same to me actually. Tap your mic and see.
Right mic?
Yeah, I'm not getting anything.
Huh. I wonder what mic. Maybe it's using my camera mic. Let's see. It says AT2020.
Interesting.
Oh, now you're good.
It came in now? It was set to
Yeah.
20. Is that better?
Yeah, that's better.
Oh, okay. Sorry, everybody.
It's okay. With my dying eyes and my poor hearing, it all sounds the same to me. But it sounds much better now, actually.
Okay.
Okay,
Good.
so
Good.
basically so it's a very fine line, I think, the way you described it between, say, the enthusiast, right, and say a professional, or am I off on that?
No, because all of the architectures are the same, right? So if you take,
Hmm.
I'm going to grab some props here. Let me grab. So here's like AMD's highest end processor. This is like a giant Threadripper processor. Let me hold it the right way. You can see how big it is, just a massive processor. And then here's a mainstream Ryzen, a fraction of the size. But internally, the architectures are basically the same. So Threadripper hasn't been updated like the Ryzen 5000 series, the latest processors that are out. But it's really the number of cores and the number of memory channels that sort of differentiate the products in a lineup. So if you're not doing something that needs a massive number of cores, oftentimes a lower end processor will sometimes be faster because the boost clocks go higher. They have more thermal headroom to play with. And you'll see when you're shopping for a processor, there'll be a base clock and a boost clock. And that boost clock is typically how fast 1 or 2 cores can go when they're under load. And the higher that is within a particular processor lineup, is that single thread performance is very important towards the day-to-day computing experience, just using your PC tooling around. It's not always all the cores that helps. So sometimes going with a Ryzen 5 or a Core i5 with a higher clock is the better choice for somebody because they're not going to use all those cores.
Interesting. So if we take sort of a modest user to let's talk about a modest user. Maybe they're using Photoshop Elements or Lightroom in Photoshop or Affinity. Are those the kind of apps that really don't benefit so much from how many cores you have, but the actual clock speed?
It depends on, again, like how you're using it. So in let's use Photoshop as the example. Right? Photoshop is really is a funny app. It seems really large and complex, but for the most part, the vast majority of what you're doing within Photoshop is not using multiple cores. It's using GPU. It's using a couple of threads, unless you're using particular filters. Some of the filters do use multiple cores. So if you were to, do a quick search online, there's the Puget benchmark. Puget Systems does a lot of benchmarking of Photoshop, yes. And it's a big complex script doing all these, crazy filters and different effects that most people aren't going to ever do on a single photo or even a group of photos. But It allows you to sort of see where the processors land in terms of performance. So for Photoshop, I don't think anybody needs a crazy high-end processor to get a really good experience. You can totally get by with a mid-range system and get a really good Photoshop experience, because I doubt most people are doing these crazy things with, with filtering. Switch to Lightroom, though. Let's say you're a wedding photographer, or you just went on a photo walk and you took 500 shots of birds or what have you as you're walking through, and you want to export that whole batch in Lightroom. That would be faster across multi-core. It's not a massive difference, but it does use the extra cores, and you will get a speed up with more cores in your system.
Okay, and I would assume an established professional would buy the best they can, but it's good to know that for the average enthusiast, you can get by, maybe save a little money on the CPU side, but get more RAM or more hard disk space.
Yeah, and one thing that probably won't come up, but I'm going to bring it up because it's a pet peeve of mine quickly before I forget. Splurge on your monitor, your keyboard, and your mouse, right? If you have decent components in your system, sometimes an upgrade, you don't perceive it. Yeah, it's helping you if you run a benchmark, but you don't actually perceive it in your day-to-day. But your monitor, your keyboard, and mouse, the stuff you interface with all the time, has a huge impact on how your workflow goes and how you feel using your system. So splurge on your input devices and your display when you can. Absolutely. Yeah,
no question. I mean, I bought the biggest keyboard I can, with all kinds of extra buttons on it. Yeah, I can tell you that this saved me money in the long run because it has all these extra buttons on it. For my purposes, when I'm streaming, I don't have to buy one of those separate StreamYard keyboards, right? I can just use this one. So I saved, a couple $100 right there just by getting a decent keyboard. And yeah, you're right. It's just like our Olympus cameras, right? The ergonomics, right, are a lot of the reasons people love Olympus. Is the user experience of holding the camera and working with a computer. The user interface, like the keyboard, the mouse, the monitor, can make all the difference as well.
Absolutely.
Now let's just add in a little bit more about, say, a videographer, somebody that says is a hybrid shooter, 50-50. They do photos and videos. How do you recommend, or how do your recommendations change, if at all?
If you're doing lots of video, you definitely want big, fast storage and as many cores in your CPU as you can afford. We were watching, lots of us that are here right now were watching your stream last night. You used the free version of DaVinci. That particular version although the studio version of DaVinci can use, let's say, the NVIDIA encoder in a GPU and some other hardware acceleration, the free version, I believe, for the most part, is just leveraging your CPU cores, right?
Yeah.
So for your workflow, the more cores you have when you're rendering a video, the better. And also, if you're working with high resolution files and you're trying to scrub through, a 4K or 8K video, not only do you need the processing resources, you need fast storage too to stream that data, in and out of memory. So those two things combined, and this is going to be a common thread through our discussion. You also need enough RAM to handle the workflow as well. So provided you have enough RAM to handle those large video files, like for video work, you can never have enough memory, right? I would say if your primary use is video, 32 gigs is probably the minimum, but the more the better. And, Core i7 class, Ryzen 7 class, or better processor will improve the experience. A modern GPU, so like NVIDIA's GPUs, the RTX 2000 series was based on an architecture called Turing. The new ones, the RTX 30 series, is based on an architecture called Ampere. They actually both have a very similar NVIDIA encoder engine. The 30 series can do hardware acceleration for the AV1 codec now, so it adds that wrinkle. But other than that, they're very similar. And on the AMD side, the latest 6000 series, Radeon 6000 series GPUs also have a media encoder that can do AV1 and H.264 and 265, so they can accelerate all of those different codecs. But you don't necessarily need the latest, greatest top-end one because an RTX 2060 has the same encoder as an RTX 2080 Ti, and an RTX 3060 has the same encoder as a 3090. Those bigger GPUs are better for gaming. They have more memory. For some effects within these programs, the extra cores that help gaming also help rendering, say 3D stuff and overlays. They do help for that, but the encoders don't change.
Yeah, so like the talking head videos that I do on my channel, I don't have to get the most expensive video card. I can kind of get the base entry level one with a good CPU.
You can probably get by with integrated graphics, for the talking head type stuff for sure.
Wow. Okay. I think so. What I guess I'm going to try and we've gotten a little bit technical here.
Sorry, I can't help it.
It's okay. I mean, it's because these numbers and part numbers and things and different brands you're talking about are very familiar to you and I. I just don't know how prevalent these names are with our users, right? With photographers a lot of times. So let's break it down to say, when I go to Best Buy or any computer store, I really see three kinds of computers. I see like these all-in-ones. Mostly those are Apples. And then I see the desktops, right? Or desktops, or you put them on the floor, the towers. And then I see the laptops. And, what you're feeling on, if you have a 5 or 6 year old computer and you're a Mac user, you want to stay with Mac, what are the different systems available to them, and which one would you recommend if they're a Mac user? And then we'll talk about PC.
So ideally, it's personal preference. If I had, my choice is to keep components separate, and I get the most work done on a high performance desktop. So all-in-ones are beautiful. They look great on your desk, but do you want your not to be able to swap a monitor if you have an issue, like having it all in one device and, basically one point of failure takes you out completely and you can't change it and you're without everything. I shy away from that personally. So I like having everything separate, a nice powerful desktop, the monitor of my choice, the input devices of my choice, the components of my choice in a system. So for my personal workflow and the way I do things, my first choice would be a powerful tower with the components that I pick. And then I would step down to a notebook. All-in-ones are great. They're beautiful. I personally wouldn't like buying them because, again, I like having my own display. Now, focusing strictly on a Mac, I'm of the opinion if you're buying a Mac today, you have to go with one of the M1s, right? I don't think long-term support for the Intel-based Macs is going to be great with Apple having their own chips now. And it's very important to buy the machine with the most amount of memory available, because you cannot upgrade them. The memory is on the M1 chip. It's not like a PC where you can throw a DIMM in there.
Mm-hmm.
So whichever form factor you pick, whether it's a MacBook Air, or a regular MacBook or the Mac Mini, pick your form factor and just get the model with the most memory. That's the way to go if you're a Mac user.
Okay. And I'm not that familiar with Mac, but do they offer like a desktop type box where you can attach a monitor separate? Because I know laptops you can always attach a monitor separate, but
right, not with the M1s yet. So there is, there's the Mac Pros, and there's the cheese grater looking machine, but they're all Intel based. They're beautiful, really powerful machines. I just don't think Apple's going to put any focus on them moving forward, because all of the software development is going to be, in my opinion, going towards M1 and improving emulation and just improving that whole platform as a whole, now that they've made the investment to make their own chips.
I see. So their choices now with the M1 are what?
There's the Mac Mini, the new M1 Mac Mini, the MacBook Air, and the MacBook.
What is the Mac Mini? Is that a desktop? I think.
Yeah. So I'm gonna hold this up. So this is like a small form factor Intel NUC machine. The Mac Mini is a little tiny machine like this. Just a little tiny desktop. So. Yeah, it's basically a notebook without a display and keyboard, just all the guts from a mobile device in a tiny little desktop.
So that's the closest thing we'll get to a component PC on the Mac side.
For now, we'll see how things move forward, because if there's lots of pros that love, the Mac Pros, the big towers with, the big Xeon processors and graphics cards. I'm not sure what Apple's going to do for that audience going forward. I'm going to assume they want to appease them and have a system that's upgradable. But with the current M1s, everything's integrated on that chip. Going forward, I would bet the farm there'll be more cores in an M1 chip and support for discrete graphics, and we'll see a more traditional Mac Pro-like desktop, but nothing's been announced. It's all rumor and speculation right now.
Okay. So if a hybrid buyer, because I think, like you said, someone that's doing mainly photos can get by with, I think, a Mac or a PC in that price range, at similar price ranges, right? Under $1,000. But a hybrid shooter, video and photography, if they had to go buy something today, their computer died, and they had to buy something today between PC and Mac in, let's say, the $2,000 price range or less, what would be the best thing for them to get right now if they're a hybrid shooter?
In my opinion, a high-end PC. I prefer the open platform. I prefer the flexibility. I prefer Windows myself. Like you, I've never dove into the Apple ecosystem, and I'm a tinkerer. I like to mess with stuff myself. I don't like the entire closed ecosystem personally. If I was going to say brands, you're walking into a Best Buy and looking at a notebook. Personally, I've had very good luck with Dell. My daily drivers, a Dell XPS 13. Over the years, I've had good luck, and I should qualify. Look at the more premium machines. Every brand has the cheaper entry-level lineup that's all plastic, and you'll find lots of detractors for every brand for those type of machines. But if you're looking at a more premium model, I like Dell, I like HP, I like ASUS is another lesser known but very good brand. ASUS is a massive company, and I like Lenovo. Lenovo makes really nice ThinkPads as well. In terms of desktops, being a longtime enthusiast, I like boutique systems. If I was spending my money on a system that someone else was building, it would be from a company like Maingear in the US. They're based out of New Jersey. A company called CyberPower PC makes nice machines, or Digital Storm. And sometimes you'll see these machines in a Best Buy as well. They're pre-configured. You don't have lots of flexibility at a Best Buy to customize them. But if you go direct to the companies, you can. And, the most recently, we actually reviewed a Dell XPS Special Edition. These beautiful towers. I love the look. It's a very clean, simple look with a nice mesh on the front. The XPS Special Editions, you can find those at Amazon or Best Buy as well. Really nice desktops with a wide range of configurations available. And again, just, if you're spending in that upper category, you're going to be in the 1800 range for a really nice high-end modern system. Yeah, I love the look of that machine. I think that's a really good looking machine. That configuration is very high end, 64 gigs of RAM, terabyte SSD, hard drive, and an RTX card. I should mention though, if you go direct to Dell, you can get RTX 30 series as well.
Oh, okay. This is a lower end one, I think.
Yeah, so you can get the same type of machine, obviously, the same motherboards inside, and they just, it'll have maybe a lower end processor, less memory, smaller SSD,
Okay.
not quite as high end GPU, and then obviously the price, plummets.
Right. So this is a good question. I think, those are some good desktop type systems, but like I said, if a buyer's going out, their computer died, they wanted to go buy another system, I mean, you're leaning heavily on the PC side, which I agree with, but here's a comment from David, in terms of just sheer performance at $2,000 or less, or let's say 1,000, let's break it into $1,000 and $2,000. If I have $1,000 and I go into the store now and I have a choice between an Apple system and a PC, at that price point, what's going to give me the better performance for photos and videos, a hybrid shooter? Because this is very common. People are seeing lots of reviews online about how great this M1 is.
Right. The M1's very good. The M1's great. Mm-hmm. I can't put it down. There's lots of nuance here. I could spend hours talking about the M1 versus x86. If all you care about is performance, and we're talking, and this is a slippery slope, because as much as I rely on benchmarks to do what I do, they're not the end all be all, because the overall experience really matters just as much, if not more. But if you're talking strictly performance, the M1s are really fast. I actually did some work recently. It's something that wasn't published, but I got to evaluate all of the M1 machines versus a handful of other machines. And across a wide array of tests, including Photoshop tests, including tests in Adobe Premiere, and including tests in Lightroom, the M1s were typically faster. It was not 1.5 times faster like most people think. For some situations, it can seem that way because of the way Mac OS and Apple handles memory, and the way the cache and the memory is so close to the CPU. The latency is really low on these Apple machines, so some benchmarks appear to be much faster. Like Geekbench is one that's commonly published, but it's not really indicative of a real world workload. Geekbench is the benchmark where people say, oh, look, the M1 is 1.5 times faster. That's amazing. Geekbench is a bunch of tiny benchmarks that fit in the cache of the processor. So it appears to run really, really fast, but in the real world doesn't necessarily translate. Not all the time. That said, the M1s are typically faster. I don't think most people would sit in front of an M1 and then sit in front of a similarly, high-end, similarly priced PC and say, wow, the M1 is so much faster. I don't think that would be the actual experience for the user. And there were some quirks with Mac OS when you're switching between apps that slowed down the workflow, at least the way that I tested it.
Right.
That said, if you just care about Photoshop, I want the fastest Photoshop experience, no filters, no compatibility things, no concerns with compatibility, and M1's a great choice. I still would try to steer people towards a PC though. Right.
That's good to know, because like I said, there's this marketing campaign plus all of the YouTube videos, all of the media that you see is raving about the M1. But I think, like you said, in terms of real life user experience, if you have two similarly priced products, one is the M1, one is a PC, the user experience is going to be very similar. Is that the takeaway, you think?
Yes, I would say that personally. You can point out differences with benchmarks for sure that show, hey, this machine's doing this X percentage faster or doing this X percentage faster. The overall experience is very similar in my opinion. And that's probably going to be unpopular, especially if you have Apple fans that are watching right now, but it's the truth. I am exposed to everything. I use everything. I have to use stuff even that I don't like for, what I do. And I still end up on a high-end PC. And the real world experience is important, and you can't always define real world experience with a benchmark. Can I get a little nerdy for a second? Like super?
Yeah, go ahead.
So some people they're going to gloss over here, but lots of the discussion on M1 is slightly off. So when we run benchmarks, right, you often run a single thread benchmark, which hits one core, right? And that's how people make comparisons, say, hey, this core is this much faster than that core. And then we'd run a multi-threaded benchmark, which hits all the cores. And you say, if you're hammering this big processor, this is how much work it can do. With the M1, those chips were designed, they're 8 cores, 1 thread a core. All of the modern x86 processors are, X number of cores, but each core can do 2 threads. So if you're running a single thread benchmark, you're using an entire core on the M1 and roughly half a core on an x86. So theoretically, you should be able to do 2 tests, 2 single threaded tests are a fair comparison versus 1 thread on a Mac. Very hard to do, very difficult discussion to make, because in the real world, most people aren't doing things that hit all 8 cores, but there's nuance there. And to just boldly say M1 is this much faster per core there's nuance there, and you can't really say that yet.
Right. So let me ask you, if there's a one benchmark that people should look for if they're a Photoshop, or what's the Adobe version? Adobe Premiere or DaVinci Resolve?
Premiere Pro.
Yeah. What benchmark should they look for when they want to do comparisons as a photographer or videographer?
There's really not just one I could point to. So something that's really handy is if you go to the DaVinci website and you download I think it's up to version 2.1, the DaVinci Raw 2.1, it has a speed test in it that will evaluate your CPU and GPU for handling raw frames at 8K with various different levels of compression. That's a good, quick, easy, simple, free test anybody can run on any platform to see how their machine performs with video, at least as far as DaVinci is involved, I should say. On a PC, I would look for actual benchmarks in the app. There's not many folks that will do a Photoshop benchmark or a Premiere benchmark. They're out there. But you can look for, in my articles, I don't have one to bring up quickly, and I don't want to be scrolling
that's
while I'm
okay.
I'm going to pull something up here.
Yeah, please. Because when I went to your site, you did break down, I think for multimedia type users, some benchmarks.
Yeah, it's hard they don't always translate to every app is the issue, right? So one app may perform differently than another because it's using, different engines or a different part of a processor. But I think I can share this. Let me get this ad out of the way. So let me share my screen here.
Okay.
So you should see an application window popping up, Rob, that you'll have to share here.
Yeah.
So this was my review of AMD's latest processors, right? And this is just strictly a video encode benchmark that uses just the CPU, right? So this is usually indicative of how a processor will perform, let's say in Premiere for encoding video. You won't not necessarily get these same frame rates, but this is the kind of spread that you would see. And you can see how, the 5950X doing 116 frames per second, that's a 16 core, top end processor. If you drop down to a 3600X, which is 6 cores and lower clocks, it's more than double, right? So for a raw encode like that, you can double your performance with the higher end CPU. In terms of a particular app, though, it doesn't always translate to a particular benchmark. Now, over and above this, I think I'm on the wrong page, but there's another benchmark. I'm gonna stop sharing that, Rob. Yeah. Over and above that, on the PC side, there's a benchmark called PC Mark that UL. It was formerly a company called FutureMark, but they put a variety of workloads in a single app. So it's video conferencing, video editing, image editing, browsing the web. It's kind of an all-encompassing thing. And the PC Mark score puts it all into one. And the higher PC Mark score generally translates to the better overall experience and performance. Okay. But if you want to learn about a particular app, you should find benchmarks for that app. And I'm going to give one more example. The Topaz denoise app's really popular with Olympus users right now. Topaz works really closely with Intel, and they use Intel's One API. They use specific acceleration in Intel processors. So it's much faster on 10th or 11th gen Intel processors than anything else. So
Right.
that's one test where, you know, an Intel CPU may lose to the latest AMD CPUs with a
Hmm.
bunch of other apps, but in Topaz, the Intel CPU is a better choice. So it's
Okay.
tough to just pick one out.
Right, right. And I've seen these kinds of relationships before between manufacturers and software, right?
Yeah.
Which brings me sort of to my next question is, we'll talk about PC first.
Mhm.
There's NVIDIA, there's AMD, Radeon type graphic cards. And I know NVIDIA has a very good relationship with like Adobe and DaVinci Resolve
Yeah.
because they sell things together, or they promote that the video cards or the software is optimized for the video card. I guess it's the other way around, right? The software
Mhm.
they optimize to use whatever's in the video card. So if I'm a user and I'm looking at a PC, um, how much difference does the video card make if you're talking about like Photoshop or Adobe Premiere?
Photoshop, not much.
Hmm.
Really not much. Yeah, like it's the same situation where we can probably pick certain filters and benchmarks, but overall, really doesn't make much difference. In Premiere, um, they're definitely better optimized for NVIDIA hardware.
Hmm.
AMD hardware is not bad. It's not bad, but there is better optimization on the NVIDIA side, and NVIDIA is even doing work with their drivers. They have their GeForce game ready drivers, and then they have
Hmm.
their GeForce Studio drivers. And the Studio
Yes.
drivers, although I haven't seen huge differences in performance,
Hmm.
NVIDIA is at least claiming, you know, better stability, better feature support for creators for apps like DaVinci and Premiere and Photoshop. So
Okay.
there is a software focus. I believe that's going to pay more dividends over time because
Hmm.
everybody wants to be a creator now. You know, everybody's,
Yeah.
you know, wants to be on YouTube, and it's becoming a really large segment and a big focus for these
Mm.
companies. So I think that'll pay dividends down the line. I would
Okay.
have no problem recommending an AMD or NVIDIA video card for just about anybody.
Hmm.
If gaming is your focus, then the conversation changes. I would lean towards NVIDIA at the high end
Yeah.
because there's minimal compromises. In the mainstream, I really like AMD's new 6700 XT. In the mainstream, it's a much harder choice, and you really can't go wrong with any of the modern GPUs. If you can buy one, you can't get them right now, though. Everything's sold out everywhere.
Yeah. Yeah. I noticed because I was thinking about building my own system, and I was like, oh, yeah, deliveries like in April, May, June.
And that you're paying, you know, quadruple of the MSRP because supply is so
Right.
tight right now.
Right. So I think um, that's
Can I bring up just one more quick benchmark? I'm going to share one more screen
yeah.
quickly,
Please.
Rob. So this is not a particular app, right? Like
Mhm.
it's not a Photoshop or a Premiere benchmark. But one of the tools I use when I'm benchmarking is called Sandra, and it has a general purpose GPU image processing test. It's basically running a bunch of filters. So it's simulating one of the tests where someone would make a script through Photoshop using a bunch of filters. And
Mm.
according, you can see here, the AMD actually has a lead with this particular test. The high-end 6900 XT was the fastest card I've tested for this. And the 3090 was actually below the 6800 XT. But again,
Mm.
this is like a specific set of filters. If you're not using, you don't really realize that performance benefit in the real world. So
I see. Okay. So just so people know, I do have links below to a lot of the articles on Hot Hardware's website if you want to take a closer look at these benchmarks for the individual CPUs and the video cards. And like I said, I think, for people that are sort of into building their own systems, this all makes a lot of sense. It says, okay, so I have a GTX 1650, and I only do Photoshop. I don't really need to get another video card. Or
right.
and if I have a 4 or 6 core processor, I'm good.
Mhm.
But if I'm doing a lot of Adobe Premiere or getting into DaVinci Resolve, it's probably a good idea to make sure I have at least enough RAM, 32 gig, and then stepping up the video card might be the next step before you go to the processor. What would you say there?
For video, it would be RAM, SSD, GPU.
Ah,
Assuming, yeah.
Okay,
Unless,
RAM.
so now we have to add, if you're running the Pro version of DaVinci that leverages some of the custom NVIDIA hardware, then maybe you want to throw one of those GPUs in your system because it will speed up the workflow, especially if you're doing high res stuff and you want to scrub through a 4K 60 or an 8K video. Then
Yeah.
then you want the latest GPU.
Okay, so okay, that makes sense. But that's interesting. So you say RAM, then SSD, then video card for most people. But if you
Right.
know your software takes advantage of the codecs for video, stepping up the video card should also be equally important.
Right. Well, I'm using your example of a 1650 in particular because a 1650 is the same architecture as a 3090 minus the ray tracing and the tensor cores, right? So the actual the compute cores and the encoder engine is actually the same. They're based on the same Ampere architecture.
Right.
It's just some of the gaming stuff that comes out. So in that particular example, yes. Now, if you're a few generations back, let's say you're one of the people that kept your drives and swapped out your motherboard and processor. You kept your GPU, your drives, and you put new RAM and a processor in, but you're using GPUs and drives from a while back. Then definitely put a newer GPU in, and you absolutely want to go, especially if you're on a hard drive, you absolutely want to go solid state. Huge difference in performance.
Yes. My mom has like a 7-year-old all-in-one, and it was on Windows 7. And all I did was replace the hard drive to an SSD, like a SATA drive. And now it's like a new computer. And then I installed Windows 10, which I agree with you, is an excellent operating system.
Yeah.
It's very smooth and efficient, I think, for the most part. Privacy concerns aside, I think it's a great, it's a great operating system. And like you say, the SSD made a huge difference. I mean, her system boots up in like 15 to 20 seconds when it used to take, 10 minutes before the thing started moving smoothly.
Yeah.
I'd open up 2 Chrome tabs and the thing would be struggling. But the SSD made all the difference.
Yeah, I assume you're like me, where people come to you with their technical questions and their computer questions, and when you go, like, I'm super spoiled. I literally have all the latest stuff, so my machine is bleeding edge. When I go to someone else's machine to help them, it is torture. It's torture if they have older hardware. It's just the things that people put up with, and this is not a dig on people. You don't understand how much better the experience has gotten in the last few years.
Yeah, and I think the SSD has just been, to me, has been the single biggest improvement over the last 5 to 10 years. Now, of course, the CPUs and processors have gotten much better too, but if all you want to do is get a faster computer, you have it at home, just change it to an SSD. Get rid of that hard drive.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you might have to learn how to do an image transfer or do a fresh OS install.
That's the
upgrade is worth it.
If somebody brought like their all-in-one 7-year-old PC and said, can you put in an SSD? What do you think? Do you think that investment is worth it? I mean, I'm guessing it's maybe $100 for the SSD and another $100 for the install for somebody to do that imaging and all of that for them.
If you're happy with the rest of the system, if it's if you're just casual and you don't need bleeding edge performance, it would be a massive upgrade to go to, even from a mainstream SATA SSD is just so much faster in terms of any hard drive, not only in terms of bandwidth, but the latency improvement is huge. And it's that latency that makes things feel snappy and just happen faster on the machine. So and it's actually if you were to buy a retail SATA SSD, lots of them come with the software to do the image transfer over. Now, you may not have another system where you can do it, because you might have to, especially with, say, an all-in-one where you might not have the drive bay, you might have to do it externally through USB, and it's a pain in the
Yeah.
butt. But if you have the resources, it's really not hard. It just takes a few minutes to do an image transfer. Personally, I would try to talk people into doing a fresh install, because you don't want to transfer all the crap that was on your old install to the new one. But
Right.
if you have to do it, you have to do it.
Yeah. Because I'm thinking of somebody like my mom. If she didn't have me there, you know,
Yeah.
she would have to take it in, and I think in her case, all she does is browse the internet and stuff. But anyway, so that kind of brings me to, we talked about the CPUs, the GPUs, 32 gig of RAM. Let's talk about monitors for a second for photographers and videographers. I think it'd probably be about the same kind of monitor, but if I want to, like, my monitor that I'm using now is about 8 years old.
Mhm.
And it's definitely gotten a little dimmer. I'm only getting about 130 at max brightness in terms of nits, right? 130 nits. But anyway, there's a lot of new monitors out there, and I'm thinking about upgrading this old monitor. Or let's say I'm buying a new monitor from scratch. What would you recommend for monitors, say, starting from $200 up to $800 or $1,000? What's the difference between, like, these monitors in terms of price? Because when you look at specs, they all say 4K, but this one's 200, this one's 800.
Right. So what you'll find is the less expensive monitors will use a panel technology often called VA or TN, like a twisted pneumatic panel. And the higher end ones will use IPS, which stands for in-plane switching, or an OLED panel. And what you find is you can get the same size and same resolution with the lower end panels, but viewing angles and color accuracy and sometimes brightness are much worse on the lower end panels. So if you're shopping for a display for photo and video editing, you don't necessarily have to go for the crazy top-end expensive pro monitors that are 5 times the price, but you do want to look, in my opinion, at an IPS panel, because they have the widest viewing angles and the most accurate color accuracy, especially after you calibrate. The only drawback now this is changing, right? There's lots of higher refresh monitors coming that are IPS, but you want to get an IPS panel with the highest refresh you can find. Often for a pro monitor of a decent size, you're only going to find 60 or 75 hertz for an IPS panel. And all of the high refresh are gaming panels, which aren't necessarily quite as accurate. But you want to shop for, pick your size, because some can be too big. I'm in front of a 32-inch display here, and it's the way I work, it's too big for me. I never use the corners. I just have my chat app off to one side. So pick the size that you like. You want an IPS panel typically, or if you have the budget for an OLED, and just go for, lots of the brands use the same panels, but again, Dell and ASUS, LG, ViewSonic, they all make good monitors.
Okay, that's good to know. So get basically an IPS panel, and for a little more, maybe an OLED. What about resolution? Is there any point to getting a 1080p versus, say, 1440p or 4K?
This is funny. I was reading an article recently on this. I'm of the opinion, right? So when you're sitting, maybe 1.5 feet, 2 feet from your monitor, you can see individual pixels. So 4K at 28-inch to 32-inch, I think, is ideal, because you can barely see pixels. You have nice smooth whites. It just looks better overall. I was reading an article recently from a photo blog, and I wish I could remember where it was, where the photographer was saying he prefers the lower res and having to punch in because he can pick out flaws in the photos better. I'm not sure I agree, and I'm not sure I agreed with his logic. So I personally would recommend, the sweet spot is 1440p, 2560 by 1440. You can find lots of great monitors that don't cost a ton of money at 1440p. It's a high enough res where it's nice and crisp when you're sitting up close. But 4K is worth it, in my opinion. It's just not seeing all of the pixels individually when you're sitting back a little, and having that nice clean image makes a difference. Okay,
so you recommend 4K if that's in your budget?
Yeah, I recommend it if it's in your budget, but the sweet spot, I don't think 1440p is a huge compromise. There's very nice monitors at 1440p.
Okay, that's good to know because I was a little worried when I looked at them. Is It's kind of a weird because I'm so used to standard 16 by 9 display. 4K is a standard 16 by 9 kind of in terms of pixels, but is 25, what was it, by 1440? Is that also 16 by 9 or is it a little bit?
Yeah. No, that's 16 by 9. Yep.
Oh, okay. Okay. So
You'll find some really nice, some of my favorite monitors over the years that I wish I never sold were these Dell 30 inches that were 2560 by 1600. They were high enough res where everything was nice and crispy, but low enough where you didn't have to deal with any of the weird issues with window scaling. Sometimes you
right.
turn on the window scaling because everything at 4K can be really tiny on the screen. You turn on
Yeah.
scaling and some of your apps don't look right.
Right.
That's getting better. That happens a lot less, but unfortunately, is still an issue because not every app has a scalable interface.
Okay. But 1440p is safe. Is safe as getting a 1080 or a 4K.
I would get the 1440 over 1080. Yeah, in
Yeah.
aspect ratio, you have no concerns, and
Okay.
those extra pixels do make a difference. A
Okay. That's
1080p
good.
display, a 1080p,
Hmm.
especially if you go say above a 22 inch, and where you can actually see the black space between pixels. I personally don't like that when I'm working on an image. I want to see the image, so I
Yeah.
would go for the higher res.
Okay. Very good. Yeah. So I'll start looking at those myself, because like I said, my monitors, although it's fairly color accurate, I got a 99. Oh, that's the other thing. Let's talk about color accuracy and things like that, because a lot of monitors, they don't publish what their accuracy is, and then some do. So my general
Mhm.
advice, if they publish their accuracy, that's probably good versus the ones that
Yes.
don't. But I mean, there's always this discussion about, 100% RGB, 100% Adobe RGB. How much do we really need in terms of, the color palette and the accuracy and all of that?
I mean, if you're not doing professional print work,
Hmm.
you probably don't need it, right?
Yeah.
But it is nice to know that what you see on your screen is going to be accurate towards what you print, and what you see is what other the colors that you're being presented are what other people with similar monitors are going to see. Like the accuracy matters in that regard.
Hmm.
It's like memory or storage. Like you want to get the higher accuracy, but is it an absolute necessity if you're not doing pro work? Probably not, because most of the IPS panels are just a higher quality, more accurate panel to begin with. The other
Hmm.
the other consideration is 8-bit towards 10-bit, and ideally, if you're a pro, you want a 10-bit panel with local dimming and a high quality IPS panel.
Hmm.
But when you work on an image and then send it out in the wild, is the person viewing that image looking at it on the same screen? Probably not. It's probably on a phone or on an 8-bit display, and
Right.
it's all of that extra accuracy is gone in terms of viewership. It just helped you create the image that you wanted.
Okay. So if there were 4 or 5 things that you need to check a box on when you're buying a monitor, what would that be?
4 or 5 things: viewing angle and the panel type. So IPS with that wide viewing angle. That's just a quick point to make. If you were to sit in front of a TN panel or a VA panel and you just go off to the side a little, you see the color shift. So if
Hmm.
you're not sitting perfectly center, the colors do actually, it's that pronounced. It does look different. That's something I tested. I could share that link to you later.
Hmm.
So you definitely want to look for an IPS panel with that wide 178 degree viewing angle. Preferably, if you have the budget, 10-bit. 99% of what you find is going to be 8-bit, and it's going to be fine with
Hmm.
the highest color accuracy that you can find. And
Hmm.
finally, at your desired size and resolution. So
Okay.
not everybody has the space for a big one, but
Right.
a big monitor, I should say. Not everyone
Yes.
has the space, but for your particular setup, just grab an IPS panel at the highest resolution that you can find. Just to throw one more wrinkle, because this is another personal thing that I like. The
Hmm.
higher refresh rate panels are often associated with gaming, just getting faster frame rates and less tearing with gaming.
Hmm.
But the higher refresh rate is easier on your eyes, and does make a
Mm.
difference if you have a high quality mouse. When you're mousing around on a high refresh display, the mouse movement is much more fluid and smooth. So if you
Mm.
are working with high res photos and you're trying to select a single pixel, it actually does help. It's more precise and it's easier on the eyes.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, getting a higher refresh rate panel is nice, but you won't often find a high refresh rate Pro panel yet. They're coming, but they're not really out there yet.
Interesting. Okay. So let's make a couple of recommendations, I guess, for someone that, they don't want to upgrade their old one. Maybe it's an all-in-one and they're ready for the next step. I think you sent me a few links for some systems that you would recommend.
Mhm.
So let me pull up. Let's see if I can share this, and then without locking up the computer again. All right, so this system you talked about early on, this is an entry-level Dell. You do recommend this system. This is ideal. So you tell me, who is this system ideal for? $1,250.
I wouldn't call that entry level. That's a pretty high end rig.
Okay.
This is fairly high end. This is not a super premium, enthusiast class. So that's a Core i7, 32 gigs of RAM is plenty. 512 gig SSD is usually plenty for most people. With a Turing-based GPU, 1650 is Turing. So this is a great all-around system for somebody who's not a hardcore gamer. If you're photo and video editing and you want something that's going to be fast when you're browsing and also doing other work, this is a great all-around system that is a notch above what I'd consider just a bare bones mainstream system. This is a nice step up that would give you a really good experience. And that's if you prefer, the white box, just buy it and forget it, and you don't want to do any tinkering or configuring yourself.
Right. And then the next one, I think, hold on. This was the high-end one.
Again, if you want to stick with a brand like Dell, this is the same XPS Special Edition form factor, but all of the guts have been upgraded. So Core i9, more cores, double the memory, quadruple the storage space because there's 2 drives in this system with a much higher end GPU as well. You pay for it another $1,000, but this one would be faster across the board with more storage space. And is also a good gaming machine because it has an RTX graphics card in there.
I see.
You can get a newer generation of RTX graphics card if you're a gamer, but an RTX 2060 is great for most people.
Okay, so this is money well spent if you're going to spend that much, based on all the things you see here.
Yeah, this is a nice rig. I have to throw one wrinkle in there.
Okay.
Where Intel is about to launch new processors in a week. So you'll see most of the systems now are 10th gen. I can show you, I can't talk about performance yet. I mean, I can show this if I can get it to focus. This is the latest Core i9 11900K. This is going to be their high-end, top-end desktop processor. I'm in the middle of testing these now for an article that will launch next week. Intel's already announced them, but the performance numbers I can talk about next week. So you'll see all of these machines get upgraded probably in the next month or so once these processors become available, and you'll go from 10th to 11th gen. But if you needed a system today, an Intel 10th gen or a Ryzen 5000 series processor, typically I would steer people towards a Ryzen processor right now because AMD has the upper hand in a lot of areas. Dell doesn't offer them in that particular model. There's other machines I sent that we could talk about. Okay. But yeah, we are in the middle of a transition for Intel stuff.
Right. So like I said, I have links to your website and your YouTube channel. So definitely, check those out next week to see the results of this. Assuming you can wait a week to buy a computer.
And if you could buy a desktop, yeah, this is desktop stuff that we're talking about.
Okay. And then let's see, this was a third party system here.
Yeah, I built my first machine after I had an HP XT class machine. And from that point forward, I've built all my own machines. So I'm partial towards these boutique hand-built systems where you can customize each part. Now, this is from a company called Maingear. Maingear makes, in my opinion, some of the best boutique systems you can buy. It's off-the-shelf components, so you don't have to worry about incompatibilities between motherboards or RAM or drives. They're using components that you can go buy yourself at retail at a place like Newegg or Amazon. But the attention to detail in a system like this is next level versus any white box system. And I'm talking, each wire zip tied beautifully and everything routed nice and neat. And you can pick virtually all of your components. So Maingear with a system like this, in my opinion, if you're spending the money now on a machine, a Ryzen 5 class machine like this Ryzen 5 5600X is a great entry point. A really fast system, the latest architecture, minimal compromises, not the most cores, but still very nice.
Yeah.
But because of what Maingear does, if you want to upgrade virtually any part of this, you can. So you can spend as little as, let's say, this stage 3 at $1699, or you can spend 15 grand at Maingear. Like, you can go nuts. They do some crazy stuff.
Right. So if I were looking at the system, I think I would probably go to an 8-core with 32 gig of RAM, and everything else looks good. So that might add.
Yep, I would agree.
That might add $400 to the overall price.
Yeah, if that. So going from the 5600X to 5800X, I'd have to go double check where pricing is now, but that's less than $200. And another 16 gigs of RAM at retail is $90 right now, in that range, give or take. So yeah, it would just be a few $100 more.
Yeah, I think that's what I would do with this, because it's already got an SSD and a terabyte hard drive on the side. Right. For backups and things. So that's pretty, I like this system. About a year ago, I was thinking about a desktop, and I saw a Maingear brand. They sell them at my local computer store, actually. But okay, let's look at a laptop.
This one's nuts.
Yeah.
Right. So the only issue with this machine is it needs more memory, in my opinion. It only comes with 16. But if you look at the specs, so right now in the mobile space, Intel is again in transition. We're about to have a new wave of 11th gen processors that should be really nice. But if you were buying today and you wanted the fastest multi-core notebook processor, it's a Ryzen 5000 series. This particular machine, a 300 hertz IPS panel, right? Super buttery smooth IPS display. Great display for working on. Not too small, 15.6 inches, but you have an RTX 30 series GPU. You have the latest generation AMD processor. You have SSD storage, fast, high refresh rate, IPS display. It's just a weird form factor. You have those two screens, and it's kind of funky, and it's expensive. But yeah, this thing is like no compromise. You just need to expand the memory a little bit.
Okay, nice. Yeah, I was looking at this laptop before I bought my G14 last year with the Intel.
Yep.
They wanted $3 grand.
Yeah.
So I was like, $3 grand, and I'm going to lose 10% in performance over a G14.
Well, you're paying for the form factor, the dual screens with
no question. That is foolish as all out. And
yep.
I tell you, I wanted that thing so bad, but $3 grand just kind of like, so I bought an S5 instead.
See, it's too big for me. I like my notebook's got to be small. At least when I used to travel all the time for work. Now I've been stuck home for a year and a half, but I like the 13-inch form factor for me. But that's really powerful.
Yeah, I love my G14.
Yeah.
Because I was looking at the newer G14, G15, and I was seeing it looked like about a 10 or 15% improvement in performance, though, over this one. Would you agree with that, or?
Not this particular one. You mean the performance of this over your G14?
Yeah, the new G14 over the last year's G14, for example.
It depends on what you're doing. In terms of raw performance, yeah, it's 10, 15%. Up to like 19% is what AMD quotes, the improvement. But with the 5000 series, this was something that AMD said over a briefing, and won't necessarily translate because not every company is going to just upgrade the processor and leave everything else the same. But the efficiency improvement in the 5000 series, they're pin compatible. So if you took the same platform and a company just swapped the 4000 series for the 5000 series, up to 2 hours of additional battery life, and that's a big deal. Yeah, that's a big deal if you're out on the road.
That's huge. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I think those are great recommendations. But definitely, I have links down below to all of these systems we just looked at. But specifically, make sure you subscribe, hit the bell notification for Hot Hardware, so when they come out with the new benchmarks on the new processors, anytime they come out, you can make a better decision about what kind of system to buy. And definitely, there's a lot more detail, of course, on the website, Hot Hardware, to the different benchmarks and things, and hopefully you have some baseline, or you need to create a baseline, I think, with a PC Mark, you said, was a decent benchmark system that kind of gives you an all-around feel for how your current computer's handling things. So when you see a PC benchmark or PC Mark benchmark online, you can compare your system to that, because that's a very common benchmark, I think.
Right. There's lots of folks, are quoting stuff like user benchmark. It's like a browser-based benchmark, or you see, because Apple has been focused on it, lots of Geekbench. I'm not putting down Geekbench. I actually use it, but it's not necessarily indicative of like overall system performance. The thing with PC Mark, there is a free edition. You can go grab it for free, and you can run it on your machine, and then you can compare it to the numbers I post in an article and say, oh, wow, this is how much faster this system would be. And with the article coming next week, because this was an important launch and AMD just, revamped their lineup, I redid all of my test beds. So I'm testing 9 different platforms with all of the latest software. And in this article, I'll be including the DaVinci raw speed test. I do have video encode. I have a multi-track audio encode, PC Mark, and a bunch of other 3D rendering stuff. So it'll all be fresh numbers. You can see it versus the previous gen and versus competing stuff. So there'll be a stack of comparison where you can see, where it falls.
Okay. And if I can throw in one more request from people like myself and probably many of our users, if you could do a few YouTube videos showing real-world Photoshop and Adobe Premiere and DaVinci Resolve sort of workflow, like,
I can try.
And this GPU, and next to this, say, so I have a Ryzen 5800 laptop with a 3060 Max-Q in it, and right here I have a new MacBook with an M1 in it, and run them side by side,
So I'm not sure. I'm going to have to get back to you because I'm on.
I'm not saying tomorrow.
No, I'm saying you bring that up. I have done testing in the past, multimedia focused, creator focused testing. I don't know if I don't remember if the client published it. If they did, I'll share that link, because we actually compared all of the MacBooks with a range of Windows machines through Premiere, Lightroom, Photoshop, and a handful of other multimedia benchmarks. And it was all custom tests. Like, there was nothing any company could optimize for, because we made the benchmarks internally and scripted it all ourselves. I'm just not sure. It was last year, and I'm not sure if we published it. So I'd have to double check and get that to you.
Okay, great. If I do get that link, I'll post it on my community tab. But a good place actually is on your channel. You have that community tab. You can post some links to it there as well, so people can find it.
Yeah, that'd be great. And we typically try to stream every week. And when there's a launch like this, we'll stream live and try to take questions from people. And I have the system next to me. Sometimes, I can't do stuff live, but I will take feedback and try to get back to people if they want.
Yeah, that's a great forum. I forgot to mention that you do live streams pretty regularly, and that's a great place users can come and ask you questions that I can't answer, obviously, right?
And that's the best part of the stream. The interaction is what I like about the stream. So
Yeah,
I don't,
yeah,
we do have to talk about stuff that we published and, try to promote ourselves a little bit, but it's the interaction that I
right,
like the best. So
right.
definitely come and chat.
And this is a perfect segue into our next section here, the Q&A, where we can kind of interact. So let me go ahead and pull up, let me find some questions.
Okay.
Like I said, this little chat, is it worth getting? This is more of a question for me. Is it worth getting a special monitor calibration software, or is the Windows calibration app adequate? So I say get calibration software, but I've never used the Windows calibration app. Do you have any input on that? On
The
this
Windows
question?
calibration app, it doesn't use a calibrator. It just runs through some, test patterns and asks you to set your brightness and contrast. Definitely
Mhm.
better to have, if you're serious about it, definitely better to have special software.
Yeah, yeah. I use one, and it makes a tiny bit of difference. I think most people don't need it unless you're doing professional work and you need to color calibrate across your workflow. But most monitors out of the box seem pretty good.
If you
Uh,
get a higher end IPS panel, lots of them will come with the calibration report in the box. The
yeah.
basic gaming monitors or cheaper monitors won't. But if you're springing for a good monitor, you'll often find the calibration of your particular monitor in the box.
Okay. And Victor says 4 gig of video RAM can be too low for 4K video editing. Depends on the software. What? So that's something we didn't talk about. Is how much RAM on the. Go ahead. Answer this one for
So
me.
he's right. It depends on the software. If the app is using the GPU video RAM, then the more the better. 4 gig is not always not enough. 4 gig is definitely the bare minimum. I personally wouldn't buy anything below 8 gigs right now. The more the better on the GPU. But I game a little bit, right? So
Mhm.
for gaming at higher resolutions, you definitely want more memory, and that will help future-proof you as well with future apps. Right now, it's not often that a piece of application will fill GPU memory, but it's going to become increasingly more common as more apps come. So you want to future-proof a bit. So go for 8 gigs. But lots of apps, if you're using the free DaVinci, I don't even think it's using all of the video memory. I might not be 100% correct on that. I have to double check. But if you're not springing for DaVinci Studio, it's usually not an issue. And I know lots of folks that use Premiere on a notebook with integrated graphics, so it will spill into system memory.
Wow.
So,
Okay. And then Victor must be a gearhead. Here's another one from Victor. How about a multi-channel? Oh, you can read that, right?
yeah, so I can see it there. So multi-channel memory's effect on video editing. It's not. So more memory bandwidth is always helpful. You don't want to be memory bandwidth bound in any situation, but it's tricky. So right now I'm going to use a Threadripper as an example, right? AMD Threadripper, the latest gen is the 3000 series, up to 4-channel memory, theoretically double the bandwidth of a dual channel setup on a Ryzen system, right? On a mainstream Ryzen system. But due to the extra cache and the new cache architecture, I'm going to try to bring up, I think I might have closed the benchmark. I closed it. I don't have it in front of me. I'm not going to find it. That benchmark I brought up before with the video encoding showed the 5950X in second place. The chip that was in front of it was a 24-core Threadripper. So more cores, double the memory bandwidth, and it was only like 2% faster.
Oh,
So
wow.
memory bandwidth does help. It's not often that you're bandwidth bound on a desktop system. In the vast majority of circumstances, you're not bandwidth bound. So it's not a night and day difference. It's the core architecture that makes the bigger difference, and the cache. So theoretically, you do have double the memory bandwidth. If you're multitasking and doing other stuff, it does help having all that bandwidth available.
Mm-hmm.
In the real world, it's more about architecture and cache. And I don't think anyone would need to be concerned. Like a Ryzen 5000 series system right now can do like 40 gigs a second-ish of memory bandwidth, and it's plenty for 95% of the circumstances.
Okay. So basically, we don't need to worry about this effect for most
You don't
of
need to, I wouldn't, no, like don't worry about it in a purchasing decision. I'm a super tech nerd. If you're considering a Threadripper and have the budget to go multi, do it, because you're just getting a more powerful system that's going to last you further down the line.
Right.
I don't think that's a make or break decision for a system right now, though. No.
Okay. Just more of the core things like CPU, RAM, and in terms of quantity, and SSD.
Yeah, more memory is typically better than faster memory.
Right. Okay. Here's a question from David about Chromebooks. I didn't even think about these. These are cool little devices, but how are they for photographers and videographers?
So for photographers and videographers, it's a hard no. The tools that you have are just, you basically have Android level tools. So if you're happy with the apps that you can run on a phone or a tablet, you can probably get by with a Chromebook, right? You don't often find the Chromebooks with nice displays are often just as expensive as a full-blown notebook. So I would steer somebody towards a full-blown notebook so you don't have any compromises in terms of what software you can run. And the lesser expensive Chromebooks, if it's a concern because of budget considerations, the experience is not going to be great on a mainstream Chromebook because the displays are crap, the processors are not really fast, you're limited in your software. So for browsing the web and just tooling around online, no problem. For a photo or video editor, I would definitely steer clear.
Okay. Yeah, I mean I think of Chromebooks as like just like a cell phone for some reason. Just a glorified cell phone. So people that use like these cell phone apps and things, could they get away with just doing that? That would be a very casual user, right?
Yeah, I mean, in my opinion, it would be. But you can run Android apps on Chromebooks now. So if there's a tablet app or app on your phone that you're particularly fond of because it's easy to use, you can run them on Chromebooks now. So that's another consideration.
I guess I may have missed some questions. If I missed your question, please ask it again right now, because this is a good opportunity to ask very specific technical questions that I could never do in my own stream. I guess David says, regarding the Chromebook, I was thinking for my wife who does use a full laptop. Thanks. Oh, okay. So he's thanks. That's cool.
Okay.
And this is, I don't know if you could add something to this comment here. After calibration, some monitors present a completely different quality. An example is a cheap Dell. Before calibrating, Delta was, what is Delta and what is calibrating 0.6? This is all, I don't know if this is...
So I know exactly what he's getting at. I'm not going to be able to explain the technical terms as clearly with monitor calibration, but I can explain why that happens. I'm going to call it the Samsung effect. Everybody now grabs a phone and everything is way oversaturated and super contrasty and bright. And lots of the panel manufacturers, if it's not a pro panel that's not calibrated, they're doing similar stuff. And when you calibrate it, it looks totally different. The monitor that I'm on right now it's pretty old. It's one of the 32-inch IGZO Sharp displays one of the first 4K displays that came out years ago. Calibrated and uncalibrated is a night and day difference. If I'm sitting in front of it when my display mate kicks in, the whites look gray for the first few minutes until my eyes readjust to the whites. It's totally different.
I see. Wow. It just feels like any particular it seems like any particular piece of the computer, whether it's the monitor or the CPU or RAM, you can go down a rabbit hole on all these different kinds of nuances and different specs.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. That's why I love doing what I do. I've always been a tech nerd. And if I wasn't writing about this stuff, I'd still be playing with it and benchmarking and trying to get the most out of my system.
Like for me as a consumer, I was looking at the 2060 versus the 3060, and I was like, well, the 3060, why why did they go to like this 7 or 8 nanometer process? What's this new architecture? And you kind of broke it down and said, really, it's the same, unless you want to do this one other thing, right?
In the real world, there is a difference going from 12 nanometer on the Turing Gen to 7 nanometer. You get a smaller chip that's lower power. They can cram more transistors into the same amount of space, and you get more features. So there's differences at a technical level for photo and video editors, and talking about what it offers. There's differences in the real world. Now, gaming is a whole nother story.
Yeah.
Gaming on an Ampere GPU is next level. Just quickly, I know we're not focused on gaming, but the RTX 3080 versus the previous high-end 2080 Ti, it just blew it out of the water in gaming tests. Like in gaming tests, there's no comparison. But if you were to take a photo editor, someone like you that's editing photos, and swap a 2080 for a 3080, I don't think you'd notice a difference.
Wow, that's good to know, because when we're shopping and trying to do our due diligence on gear, for computers, that's all you see are gaming specs. I'm like, why is everybody gaming? It's like,
the gaming systems are usually the fastest systems. That's a high-end gaming rig is usually a no compromise rig. If you can game well, you can usually do everything else well.
Right, but it seems like you said, I don't have to get a 3080. I could probably buy a 1060, for example, or something. I don't know.
Yep.
But okay, so there's another question here from John. Is there a benefit to using multiple SSDs, maybe for one OS and one for apps and the one for data?
Yes, many benefits. First, just having redundancy is a good idea. Second, what you'll find, and I'm going to speak in terms of Windows, because that's where I'm most confident. When you're running Windows, no matter what you're doing, if you're sitting in front of a Windows machine right now and you hit Control-Alt-Delete and bring up Task Manager, you'll see sometimes hundreds of processes running in the background, even if you don't have any apps open. And oftentimes those apps, they're writing little bits of data. They're doing stuff that's accessing the drive. Windows maintains a swap file if it's, if you don't have a lot of memory in the system. And just having another drive to handle different apps, you're basically spreading the workload. So in addition to having redundancy, you do get a performance benefit as well overall. Now, what you'll find, even with modern SSDs, depending what you're doing, even with a fast SSD, like I'm going to use an example of downloading a torrent, or sometimes downloading a game from Steam, where you're using a service where it can write data really quickly. You'll feel that latency difference even on a fast SSD. You'll go to do something else and stuff doesn't launch as fast, or just doesn't feel as fast as normal. Whereas if you're spreading that load on another drive, it does make a difference, right? You don't have to worry about it if your OS is separate from that. So if you have the means to have separate drives in your system, by all means do it, because it does help workflow, and it limits wear on the drives. You'll get more longevity out of your system as well. It's a good idea if you can do it.
Okay, so the multiple drives is a good idea, but in terms of, because I noticed like in Lightroom or Photoshop, there's always these like performance options. Like, do you want to put your cache files on here or here? So I would, what would you tell people to do, like to optimize their multiple hard drive use, say in Lightroom or Photoshop, maybe?
Good point. I am going to bring up a share, Rob. Let me just get my graphs in place here. I'm going to share my screen just to show some performance data from an SSD article I did recently. So when you're looking at drive performance, lots of times people will strictly look at sequential performance, look at this high bandwidth and say, wow, so I brought up this particular review because I tested a wide array of drives. So a Samsung SSD 980 Pro is like one of the latest PCIe Gen 4. It can do, close to 7 gigs a second transfers. That's the number most people see, and they're like, holy crap, look at how fast this drive can transfer data. And as you step down the line, you see, let's use this 670p as an example. Oh, this one can only transfer half the data. It's half as fast. That's only the case when you're transferring a big, massive file, a big sequential file transfer. If I scroll down to this test, this is going to get technical for a second, but most of the workloads on a consumer PC happen at a queue depth of 1, where there's not tons of IOs going to the drive with a single thread. So this is a Q1 T1 test. And these are random 4K transfers, reads and writes, random 4K transfers. Lots of the little file writes on Windows are small 4K writes. So this chart is more indicative of the responsiveness and what you feel when you're using a machine. And you'd see that the drive that was in last place in sequentials is faster in 4K writes than the Samsung drive, and right in the same class for reads. So if you want to optimize the performance of like a scratch file for Adobe apps, ideally, if you have the option, you want a drive with fast 4K writes for your OS, and a drive that balances sequential transfers and 4K transfers for your Adobe apps and the scratch file. That's how you'd get the best performance, is keeping the OS separate, having a drive with fast 4K transfers and high bandwidth. So this Samsung drive would be a very good choice because it's among the best for 4K transfers with that really high sequential performance. And then, your minimal compromises there. You have the best of both worlds: responsiveness for the OS, bandwidth, and responsiveness for your Adobe apps and the scratch data.
Okay. Yeah, I like, and that's something I think a lot of people, like you said, they look at the total transfer of large files, but not the actual like real workflow that's dealing with small files all the time, like your cache and Windows and everything like that. And, when I was researching external SSDs, one of the things I looked for was that 4K transfer rate. And I found that a drive that was about 20, 30% cheaper, meaning I spent $200 instead of $280 for a 2 terabyte SSD, because the 4K transfer rate was pretty much the same.
Right.
And that's all I cared about, because I knew the large media files, once I downloaded them, I usually go get coffee or something while stuff is transferring.
Right.
But when I want to work on stuff, that's where it makes the difference, is in that 4K. And this is a question we haven't even covered at all.
Pet peeve of mine. I love this question. I
have
this
no
question.
idea what this is about.
So we've been stuck on gigabit Ethernet networking for years, right? Lots of us, I'm going to go on a little bit of a tangent. You can buy wireless routers now where the wireless connection between your notebook and the Wi-Fi is greater than a gigabit, right? But then from the switch coming out of your router is, unless you've got a really modern router, is a gigabit wired connection. So no matter how fast your Wi-Fi is from your notebook to your router, it can't leave that router faster than gigabit, right? Because of that switch. And that limits your transfer speed. Like right now, I often copy movies and my raw images to network attached storage for backup. The fastest you're going to get on gigabit networking is about 108 to 111 megabytes per second, which is so slow. That's the limit of gigabit networking, right? And that's what's holding back network speeds for tons of people. So personally, I'm about to upgrade my network to 10 gigabit, which will take that peak to like 600 to 700 megabytes per second with the right switch. But you need your router. Well, you don't need the router. If you have a switch with 10 gigabit ports and 10 gigabit Ethernet controllers in your PC and the right wiring in your house, then you can get that kind of performance. But gigabit has been holding everybody back. If you really want to, if you're working with big files and transferring to network storage and you're not doing any sort of teaming, the single gigabit connection is a limit for years. And I'm happy now to see this getting alleviated. This 11th gen Intel system I'm testing, the motherboard has 2.5 gigabit connections on it. And in my rig, I have an Aquantia 10 gigabit NIC. Now, if you're looking for a specific faster than 1 gigabit controller recommendation, there's a few. If you just want something super simple, USB, there's a 2.5 gig killer networking controller available on Amazon, really cheap. That works well. If you're looking for an add-in card, I really like the Aquantia. They were bought by Marvell recently, but you'll see cards from ASUS and Gigabyte that use the same chip on it. And it goes by, I believe the model is AQ107. So it's a 10 gigabit, uses standard Ethernet. You don't have to change all your wiring in your house. and just plugs right in like any other controller, and it works perfectly. I've had one in my personal rig here for 1.5 years with no issues.
Wow. So is there any, see, this is a topic I had no knowledge of. Like when I see 1 gigabit, 10 gigabit, I'm like, what difference does that make? Because, well, anyway, because I'm at 100 megabits up and down on my, which is 1/10 the speed of the,
Well, that's
1
going
gig.
out. That's going out to the web. But if you were to transfer files from PC to PC, you're on
Yeah.
your internal network, which is most likely
Oh.
limited to gigabit or whatever your Wi-Fi speed is.
Yeah, I've totally given up on wireless file transfer at my own house because I'm getting like 5 to 10 megabits or megabytes, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Like a very small fraction of. It's just faster just to hook up a USB drive externally for me. But I would love
and
to, like in my
that's
bedroom
the
or
problem. Like
you know.
for you to have to do that's the problem. That the gigabit has held us back for years. So
Ah,
I'm happy it's just now getting to the point where we're starting to see multi-gig ports
yeah.
on
So is
some
like
routers,
Wi-Fi
and you can get
6
switches.
something that we should look for? Does that mean anything? Wi-Fi 6?
I mean, yes and no. Wi-Fi 6 will get you better range, more reliable connection. This is another whole rat hole that we could go down. But yes,
Okay, so
like
this
Wi-Fi
has nothing
6
to do with the
is
10
better,
gigabit thing.
sort of, because you can get Wi-Fi 6 wireless connections that are faster than gigabit. So it's sort
Mhm.
of pointless to have that because it can't leave the router faster than gigabit because of that wire. Like the wire is actually holding it back.
Ah,
So
so I'm trying to think of my house. I have a Verizon router,
mhm.
and there's a Ethernet cable plugged into it from some other box that's in my basement. You're saying that wire itself is the problem?
Well, so you have right now, you have a wire from your modem coming into your router, right? That's your outward connection to the web. But
Hmm.
inside, if are your machines all wireless or any of them wired networking right now?
Everything is wireless from that point.
So everything's wireless. So for you, you're limited to the speed of the wireless connection between your PC and router. But lots of people will have, so you'll have your router, right? Let's say you have your Xbox, 2 wired PCs, and a notebook, right? And you're trying to transfer something from your notebook to the desktop PC. The notebook, theoretically, if you have a good router, could have a wireless link that's faster than 1 gigabit. But from the router to the desktop PC, that gigabit wired connection is the bottleneck. You can't go faster than a gigabit.
Mhm.
So you'll see these wireless routers that say, 1733 or 5.6 gigabits per second wireless.
Yeah.
That's just like an aggregate of the total capability of the wireless. But once
Mm.
you have to leave the router and go out of one of the gigabit wired connections, you're limited to gigabit, period.
Wow. Okay. Well, I'm definitely gonna have to learn more about that because that's a totally foreign thing to me.
That's super
Um,
nerdy and nobody cares because Wi-Fi just works for most people. But if
yeah,
you care about
exactly.
performance, there's a lot.
And then this is sort of a backup question, I guess. We kind of covered a little bit, but if you could answer this more specifically for them.
The newer Ryzens are better across the board. So there's no specific AI acceleration in Ryzen processors. Intel does have specific extensions and accelerators in their 10th and 11th gen chips for AI that do make them faster for specific workloads. But in terms of Ryzen, the newer generation is better because the architecture is much better. Just to give an example, I'm going to share my screen one more time, Rob. Let me just scroll to the image that I want to share because this helps explain the difference from the two generations. So if you were to go from a previous gen Ryzen to the latest gen, the Ryzen 3000 series is based on the Zen 2 architecture. The latest 5000 series is based on Zen 3. And fundamentally, the actual CPU cores are very similar, right? The way AMD builds their chips, each set of 8 cores is part of a single chiplet. But on the Zen 2, on the Ryzen 3000 series, you have 2 4-core complexes, each with 16 megs of cache, right? On the new ones, you have a full 8-core complex with a full shared 32 L3 cache. So effectively, you have lower latency between the cores because you don't have to jump across any fabric. And then you have not only a larger single pool of cache, but all cores can access it. So for just about everything, I don't think there's a single benchmark, a single metric where you'd measure the latest Ryzen versus a previous gen and find the previous gens better. The newer ones, it's just a better architecture, and it's faster all around because of that.
Wow. So that's a significant improvement from older gens. And
yeah, AMD's just been on a tear. The
yeah.
progression from Ryzen, the first gen to second gen to 3000 to 5000 series it's been really a sight to see. It has injected like a lot of excitement into my business. Sites like us, we at Hot Hardware, we thrive on this kind of enthusiast hardware,
Yeah.
and to be able to write about this stuff, it's really
Yeah.
good for us. It's great stuff.
It's like when Olympus released a new camera, I'm like all giddy.
Right.
So
Yep.
I guess the second part of that question is they use FX, OpenVINO, and Luminar. Is it better to get a new GPU?
So for Luminar, I'm not sure what acceleration they're using. I don't know. I'd have to go research what Luminar is using. I know for Topaz, a new Intel CPU is the way to go, though it does use GPU as well. It's actually not as fast on GPU, though. For Luminar, I don't have a good answer. I'd have to go research that one.
Okay. But in some software it does. So I guess they could go to Luminar's site and see if they have mentioned anything about any specific processor or GPU that it works better with.
Yeah, I'm sure it's out there. I haven't used it.
I'm not saying you do it. I'm just saying for the for the user, because I found sometimes when I'm looking at software, there'll be a little checkbox. It takes advantage of Intel QuickSync or it takes advantage of NVIDIA CUDA.
Right.
So I look for those things very specifically sometimes when I'm buying software because I have that specific hardware. But okay, I think we can wrap it up here. I really appreciate your time, and I encourage everyone to check the links below for his YouTube channel, his website, so you can and links to additional articles that go into more detail about a lot of the things we talked about. Marco and his channel Hot Hardware is an incredible resource for people that are interested in computers and all of the technical innovations. I guess I'm not really wording this properly, but all the new stuff that comes out. I was really a hardcore tech geek 10 years ago, but I've kind of gone into photography since then. But it still interests me when I see these new architectures like this. Why is the M1 so much faster? Well, basically they put all the memory on one plate or something like you were saying. And then Ryzen is doing something kind of similar, maybe with the cache memory instead of the main memory. So there's different reasons, different processors, different CPUs and GPUs perform better now than they used to, and how it applies to things that we do with Photoshop and Lightroom and Adobe Premiere or DaVinci Resolve. There's lots of things we need to look at, but the systems that you recommended earlier on, the two Dells, the ASUS laptop, I feel like will get us 90% there, maybe with a couple of tweaks, right?
Yeah, and if somebody's if you're inclined and even thinking about building your own system, just do it. It's fun. It's easy. It's like Lego. You can't mess it up. You can save some money, and it's a great learning process too.
Yeah, and your channel would be a great resource for exactly what hardware to buy, especially during your live stream. People can come in and say, I saw this article on your website and these benchmarks. I'm thinking about putting this CPU and GPU together. What motherboard would you recommend, for example? Because we didn't even talk about motherboards or power supplies. It's like it's a whole field that I think area that your site and your channel is a great place to start and a great resource for people when they have questions to ask about those things, because they're definitely not me, right?
Well, no, you know a lot more than you let on, Rob. It's part of the reason I love watching your stuff, because when you bring out the techie stuff, I'm like, oh yeah, Rob's talking tech.
Yeah. Don't get me started on Amiga. Amiga and Commodore. Let me tell you.
Yeah, man, I can go for hours talking about the Amiga.
Wow, because I used to recommend Amiga systems to my friends back in the late 80s, or early 80s, I should say. And the one guy still has his Amiga sitting in the basement. I just couldn't believe it. But anyhow,
There's still
Marco,
new hardware being developed for the Amiga.
that's
There's
amazing.
yeah,
That's amazing.
it's crazy.
I can't believe it. So, um, and I think a lot of photographers like myself are very technically orientated, right? We have backgrounds
Yeah.
in this kind of stuff, or a passion for it, or an interest anyway. Um, so if they haven't been to your channel and your website, this this is another great resource. Like you said, you're still an independent company or publisher. You're not influenced by advertising and all of that stuff. You can give your true opinion and workflows and you're kind of like me in a lot of ways, right? You're not affiliated with anybody. You're just doing the best
Right.
you can to help people make the best decisions in that particular area. In this case, computer hardware. So,
Yeah.
uh, all right, guys. Thanks, Marco. We'll hopefully we'll have you on again, maybe in a few months when there's some new gear out that we can talk about. I really appreciate you taking the time to spend it with my viewers on the channel here. And any last words for the audience before we go?
I want to thank you for having me. I really enjoyed it. I enjoy watching your streams every weekend. That's my Sunday morning ritual after I get back from the gym. And yeah, I try to keep the super technical stuff. All of us on the site try to use plain English when we can, to make the site more digestible to mainstream readers. We don't do the crazy brain dump every article because we know people's eyes will gloss over. But I would love it if everyone stopped by Hot Hardware, check out the site. Definitely check out the channel because that's going to be a focus for us this year. We're trying to have more video. My partner Dave just published a phone review. I think it was yesterday or the day before, and we live stream typically Wednesdays at 5:30. If you'd love to come chat, any question is great, whether it's on topic for what we're talking about or not. I love the interaction. And again, I really appreciate you having me on, Rob.
Okay, great. It was great having you, Marco. Have a good weekend. What's left, or when it starts? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
It's time to end when I can't say a sentence. So, thanks everybody for joining us today. I really appreciate everyone taking time out of their day to be with us and talk about this technical stuff. So, everyone, have a good weekend. We'll see you again soon.